Hello, welcome to In the Kitchen with Brett Thorne, a food service industry podcast by Restaurant Hospitality. I'm your host, Senior Food and Beverage Editor Brett Thorne, and I'm very pleased to have as my guest for this episode, Jason Asher. Asher is the founding partner of hospitality and cocktail entertainment company Barter Shake in Phoenix, which, apart from its consulting business, operates Century Grand, a building that houses 3 separate cocktail bars, the Grey Hen, Platform 18, and Undertow. One is nautically themed, one is train themed, and the other is a whiskey bar dressed up as an apothecary. I really enjoyed talking with Asher because he seems like something of a mad scientist. He uses 2 books, The Flavor Bible by Karen Page and Andrew Dornenberg, and Taste Buds and Molecules by Francois Chartier as his source material to develop very involved, elaborate cocktails that sound delicious. There's a lot of innovation going on in beverages these days, arguably even more so than with food. Visit our website, restaurant-hospitality.com, and you can see a story about what one beverage director calls 3-dimensional cocktails, in which cocktails are served with little snacks intended to pair with the drinks, giving another dimension to the experience. There's also a story up there about pairing beverages with chocolate, and a third on innovations in tea. As we all know, many restaurant guests are looking for more than just a good meal when they dine out. They want an experience, a show, if you will, and drinks are a way to help provide that. On top of that, photogenic drinks perform really well on social media. Posing with your favorite drink is a sort of pastime in a way that posing with food isn't. It's kind of an odd phenomenon that I don't fully understand, and you'll be hearing from more drink experts in the coming weeks on this podcast, and I'll try to explore these issues with them. But with Jason Asher, we talked really mostly about his process for combining flavors into elaborate, beautiful cocktails that sound great. I hope you enjoy listening to our conversation as much as I enjoyed having it. And now, here's Jason Asher. Yeah. And you are a drinks guy, right? That's your thing?
Cocktails, yeah. Cocktails are my focus. That's my role within our company.
I see. And so what is distinctive about your 3 concepts and of your company?
Yeah, so the Century Grand building houses 3 incredibly immersive concepts, for lack of a better word. From the minute you step foot in the building, you are sort of whisked away in this immersive environment as you figure out where exactly you're going to be sitting for the next 90 minutes. And once you figure that out and you have a reservation and they take you to where you're going, you either board a boat or you board a train or you sit in an apothecary waiting for a train to arrive. So one of the 3 options in that building, there's a storyline, a fictional narrative that connects the dots, that really joins the storylines that bring each of those spaces to life, as you can imagine, with an immersive environment such as the Century Grand and those 3 individual concepts within. It's absolutely essential to bring a little bit more, I think, mysticism or have a little bit more fun. And we do so by bringing a fictional narrative with amazing characters to life through our somewhat daunting, it's 50, 60-page cocktail menu that's filled with illustrations from amazing artists that include Disney Imagineers and so on and so forth. So it's quite an exceptional experience. Now you step foot in the building, and of course, liquid is what you're going after. Hopefully you're on a liquid diet because that's what we do best.
Excellent.
And cocktails are a thing. I have spent nearly 20 years or so working on cocktails, working on flavors, working with flavors. And I've created a relatively interesting approach to creating drinks, which is, I think, what sets us apart from the rest of the pack. We are willing to do things that most people won't. We are willing to try things that people can't. And because of that, we're able to push boundaries in a way that I believe most of these cocktail ideators, I'm going to use that term these days, mixologists, if you will, that they just don't have those opportunities. We are willing to push those boundaries. Travel is a huge part of the inspiration. We pick a place, we pick a location, and that location really is the focal point for our story, our fictional narrative for that menu launch. And I jump on a plane and I go to that location and I research the cuisine and the culture, and I re-implement those findings into our menus.
So you create a new story with every menu, is that right?
Every time we launch a menu, the story evolves. Correct.
And how often do you do that?
We launch our menus once a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're on your third or fourth?
Let's see. The Century Grand building, I'm going to break it down by bar. Undertow, the oldest bar, been around since 2016, is on its fifth menu. There was a little prohibition that happened for 2 years, as you can imagine. We call it the pandemic. I call it prohibition because they tried to stop us from doing our thing, yet this industry is the most resilient industry in the world, and we rebounded, and I think we rebounded in a huge way. But yeah, we run our menu for a year, so that's on its fifth. The other two bars, the Platform 18, the train concept, is on its second menu, and we are on our second menu in the Gray Hen. However, they just picked up their first fictional narrative and storyline to go with their menu. So really, it's like the first real menu in the way that we do it for that particular concept called the Gray Hen.
So all three of them have different narratives, not necessarily related to each other. Is that right?
I think that for those individuals, our guests that really enjoy the storyline portion of what we do, and that can certainly yield some interesting questions and some observations. And I will say that all worlds collide. And so if you're interested in reading a really fun fictional narrative that's loosely based on actual factual history, then read the stories and you'll see for yourself that perhaps the protagonist in one story is the same as another, which then kind of yields a question as to why there's a 200 gap in storyline and how is this possible? Which then brings you back to the apothecary, where a little witchiness is happening.
And that's where you're waiting for your train or your boat in the area.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
If you want, you could start drinking at the apothecary and then go to one of the other two concepts via train or boat if you wanted, right?
You could.
But you need reservations at all of them. Is that right?
We recommend it. Obviously, the early days of the week are a little easier to walk in. We reserve about between 4 and 6 seats of every room for walk-in business. But our business is heavily dictated by the reservation list that we have every single day. Our weekends, call it Thursday, Friday, Saturday, book out 30 days out. Thursdays can be a little looser. Thursdays and Sundays are usually like 14 days out. And then the rest of the week is usually week of, or just, within 7 to 10 days. So you can usually get yourself in if you're planned. But as you know, I'm sure you're a well-traveled individual, right? You cannot go into a city these days without reservations and expect to go to the best restaurants or the best bars. There's just it's not going to happen unless you're there on Tuesday. So it is absolutely essential that I believe that all guests that are coming into our building or traveling into Phoenix plan and get their reservations. I mean, some of the best restaurants in town really need reservations because they're small.
And are most of your guests from out of town, or is it mostly locals or a mixed bag?
We have a very large local following. I would imagine that we're probably 70% local to 30% visitors from other cities. Although it ebb and flows, summertime, you're getting a little less influx of tourism. But, come October, tourism really starts to crank again. We hit a little bit of a lull during the holidays, and then you roll into February here in town, where the town gets flipped upside down with spring training and the Waste Management Open and the Barrett-Jackson and the Arabian Horse Show. And this year we add in the NFL's Super Bowl, which then just compounds what is already a killer 90-day run for us. And that also that 90-day period also houses the Arizona Cocktail Weekend, which is a huge week that really promotes all that we're doing here in Phoenix. So.
And on top of that, you have people like me fleeing the winter and going to Phoenix in February.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, February's jumping. It's the best time of year to be in Arizona. You know, the weather breaks right around the beginning of February. And when I say break, it's probably for us zonies, maybe that's what that means. February is the weather break here, but it gets into the low 80s and it's perfect. You know, high 70s, low 80s for the month of February. And then things begin to climb as we get into, May and June. But yeah, we have a really, really great and huge influx of tourism that comes into this town and bringing a ton of commerce. More importantly, you know, it really has sort of eliminated the off time. We don't really have an on and off season quite like we used to. You know, it was really cut and dry. You could draw a line in the sand and you would say, okay, here we are. It is summer and we are slow. But that is not the case. You know, we are maybe dipping 15%, which really in the big picture isn't really enough to freak out about. In fact, it gives our teams a little bit of time to give our family members within our company a little bit of extra time off if they need it and things like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was in Phoenix as a child in the summer visiting my mother's former roommate, and I think I'm still traumatized by the heat. And yet, as locals, they went out and played tennis in the middle of the day when it was 115 degrees. So, God bless them.
Yeah,
we stayed.
We wear coats out. We're crazy. You know, we're wearing long sleeves in the summer just to keep us shaded from the sun. But you know, yeah, it's hot. This was a relatively cool year. I felt we had a couple weeks of pretty hot weather. But overall, the monsoon season, which is where we're in the middle of, just coming out of, I should say, certainly chills the city out a little bit. You know, you get these walls of dirt and rain that roll in fast and quick and get out, but it drops the temperature by 10 to 15 degrees instantaneously when it happens. So
then you're down to the 90s and, you know, everybody can.
I mean, everybody's happy with 90s, right? As long as you have a swimming pool.
Yeah, well, I mean, I grew up in Denver, so I'm familiar with the dry climate of the West, and it really is different from here in the Northeast where it is. When it's in the 90s and humid, it's not nice.
We were just in Charleston for a couple of days, and I will tell you, it was pretty nice for the first two, and then it got a little gnarly, hot and humid towards the end, but it was still a great experience.
Yeah, Charleston's great, but I don't think I've ever been there at the height of summer, but I think I would feel like I'm being poached.
You might be.
Yeah. But anyway, let's talk about your concepts. I'm interested in your description of your cocktails is you taking a different approach to your cocktails. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Are these different?
Yeah, 100%. You know, I think that if I look at the progression of, I'm going to use the word ideation. We can change the word if you prefer cocktail development. Ideation works. Okay. So ideation is something that a term we use to talk about the coming up with an idea that eventually will turn from paper to liquid, right? And this idea really, in my opinion, after spending time in the culinary world, I went to culinary school after I finished college and came back, and I worked with some amazing chefs around the country. And I mean, some really big, amazing individuals. And I learned a lot, right? And at the beginning, where are you? Here we go. Right. This was like the stepping stone, right? Everybody hands you a flavor Bible and you take the flavor Bible and you have to figure out exactly what it is. I picked up the phone and I called Karen and Andrew and talked to them. And I said, talk to me about your book, right? Your book is an interesting idea and I want to know more about it. How does it work? I have Culinary Artistry, their very first book that they launched, right? And it is without question a Bible. It is a desk reference and a guide for the novice cook, mixologist, and everything in between to navigate flavors, right? It's a book full of ingredients and there's coding to the book. So once you figure out the code, it could be pretty easy to get through, right? Bold words are more likely to be good with this ingredient. Bold words with caps is probably more likely than the previous to even be better with this ingredient, and so on and so forth. So we get through this book, and this is really the jumping off point, right? And it becomes, go ahead.
Sorry, this is Karen and Andrew Dornenberg they're talking about in their book.
Yeah, and this is, I'm asking them questions. They're giving me a guidance on how this, and I just picked up the phone and called them because I wanted them to show up in Phoenix and teach class, right? I'm all about bringing the education and the culture into the city to create better and longer lasting culture in the city. So with that being said, I use this, and I use this book for years. And the book is a staple book in our teachings these days. Now, as we began to expand, I spent a lot of time in different areas of our industry, and I eventually launched Barter Shake as a company. And with that came the education that needed to be passed on to our disciples, if you will, the bartending group that we had in our building, our bartenders, our bar managers, and teach them how to write drinks, right? And flavors are easy. I can look up blueberry and I can find basil, and I know that blueberry and basil are really nice and harmonious together in a drink. So I can make a cocktail with those two ingredients, and you'd probably say, oh, this is nice, this is good. But the question is, how do we really evolve that? How does it elevate? How do we elevate this concept? And then the next book that fell into my lap a couple of years ago is this book, Taste Buds and Molecules. Have you ever seen this book?
I have not.
This is a killer book. I don't produce it anymore. In fact, I've got a stack of them on my desk because every time I find a used one, I buy it. This one came from some library. You can see that there's even like a checkout thing on it. So I hand them out to our team as they get into the next phase of their education with us. And this book, go ahead.
Taste Buds and Molecules, it's called.
It's killer. Yeah. And they're only available used these days, and they're expensive. I found these ones were pretty reasonable, but they're expensive. They're a couple $100 sometimes when you find them. So this book takes the entire idea of flavors and blows it open with like a stick of dynamite. It's incredible. It talks about the science of flavors. It talks about why cinnamon tastes like cinnamon. How can basil have cinnamon in it? Cinnamon basil, that is. Why? How's that even possible, right? The question is, and the answer is in this book. And this book guides you through the scientific makeup of flavors and all flavors. And so this is really the next stepping stone after the Flavor Bible. I call it flavor integration through the science of flavors. And so we lay a foundation with this, and then we teach them the intricacies with this. And that's how we write our drinks. It gives us a really, really solid ground to stand on, a platform to teach our staff members and our family members how to ideate cocktails. And that is a huge step. Now, we do a lot of consulting, right? And I don't really go too far past this book. If I'm doing consulting and I'm working on programs for some of our clients, right? Marriott and a few others, we have some really big ones. This is where it stops for them.
Flavor Bible.
Flavor Bible. And it's a great resource. But when we talk about what we're doing and how to nuance a drink, right? Not just mix ginger and Amaro together with lemon and whiskey and call it a drink. It's how do we take ginger and accentuate it? How do we take ginger and rise it up to the top of the drink and make it the forefront flavor, or give it a backdrop and allow other things to rise up through maybe that Amaro that we're using, right? But the question is, oh, I might need juniper berry. Okay, well, is gin the way to go? Because juniper pops up. So let's pull out this and let's put juniper back in. We're going to get juniper through the use of gin, which this book doesn't get into the chemical makeup. And those are the kind of things that I find missing from here. But that's it. That's how we teach. That's how we build all of our drinks. I can get super geeky on just two flavors and walk you through it, right? If I was to do that, I could say peach, the lactones in peach yield the need for this other chemical that we find in thyme, which is why peaches and thyme are pushed together often, not just because they say so in this book, which this book is a collection of opinions, right? They surveyed 100 chefs, and these chefs said, oh my God, when I use blueberry, I always use basil. Great. We're going to put it in here. We're going to let the world know that these 100 chefs find these things, these important. Again, this was a James Beard award-winning book when it came out. So, but that's how we write drinks. And all of our cocktails are done through this idea of mapping flavors and using science to integrate them together.
So that would explain probably why I like cantaloupe and whiskey so much together.
There you go. I think whiskey and cantaloupe is fantastic. We would use cantaloupe more frequently if there wasn't such a health department issue with it. They have major issues with cantaloupe. So
Yes, that happens. So why don't you talk me through a couple of cocktails and how you make them and why and like that.
Okay, let me pull a recipe up for you. I'm going to walk you through one of our cocktails that I find to be extremely approachable, but layered and layered and layered and layered with flavor. So let me pull that up, and that's this one. This is really one of my favorite drinks on the menu because it pulls you back to Phoenix, and there'll be a little history. I'll tack in a little history on this too. It's called Isla, Isla, Santa, Santa Maria, Isla Santa Maria. And this is a tequila drink. And now this particular drink lives in our gray hen concept. And this drink lives in a bar that is whiskey centric. So most of the spirits we're using are either whiskey or aged spirits in this program.
And is that the train one or the boat one?
That is the Apothecary.
Oh, the Apothecary. Okay. All right. The Gray Hen, whiskey bar, Apothecary.
Yeah. So
then we have Isla Santa Maria.
This particular cocktail uses an aged reposado tequila. A reposado tequila. I'm gonna pull up one more thing here. I apologize. Get the notes up for this particular drink because there's lots to talk about. All right. So Isla Santa Maria, has a backbone of a drink called a Paloma, right? A cocktail that, as hard as we dig to find the origin of a product or a cocktail called the Paloma, we find ourselves sort of spinning our wheels. We find that with a little additional research that Squirt was really the creator of this drink, and they did it through marketing. Marketing was the particular vehicle that they chose to promote this product. This product, Squirt, was created here in Phoenix, which takes you to the West Valley, where they had grapefruit groves, etc. And they had beautiful Oro Blancos, which is sort of the backbone of the grapefruit style for this particular grapefruit soda called Squirt. And we find in the 50s that there's some ad campaigns that come out that say mix Squirt with all these different spirits, and it's great. And tequila being one of those spirits, and hence that cocktail is born. I don't even think we see it in print until like 2000. However, the backbone for this cocktail is strictly that. And we actually take old Mexican Fresca bottles that we get out of Mexico, and we send them off to our revamp glassware company here. And that glassware company recycles glass into glassware, bottles into glassware. And so we cut them down and we actually reuse them in glassware. So it's just another part of our program that goes back to sort of giving back and being a little bit more aware and conscious of the environment and trash and things like that. So we're recycling the glassware, which is a huge part of what we do. We take advantage of those opportunities when we can. So this cocktail...
Sorry, these are old Fresca bottles, another grapefruit soda like Squirt that you get turned into glass, and correct. Then your interpretation, I guess, of a Paloma, which is tequila and Squirt, or tequila and
grapefruit soda. Correct.
Okay. Right.
So yeah, and so we actually use grapefruit in a different way, and we bring back the soda piece with a house-made lemongrass soda. So this cocktail really uses a lot of interesting ingredients. It uses ginger and galangal syrup. And so we're using galangal root, which is a slightly more aromatic, floral aromatic type of ginger root, another root that we use. And we cut the syrup 50-50. So we make ginger syrup, galangal syrup, and we blend them together. And they're fantastic. We use a grapefruit cordial that we make in-house. And the grapefruit cordial is a complex and layered syrup that uses ingredients like white peppercorn and coriander and star anise. And these ingredients together help to heighten and raise the grapefruit up big time. In fact, it's almost like it puts it on steroids. It's incredible. But it brings a lot of complexity and layers to that syrup. When that syrup was just grapefruit syrup, it would have been really singular in dimension. This brings a lot of dimension to what would be a really simple syrup.
And so you use the grapefruit zest, I'm guessing, to make the syrup, or grapefruit juice, or both, or?
So this particular ingredient uses a little bit of grapefruit juice. It uses syrup. So we take simple syrup as a base. It gets grapefruit zest. It gets grapefruit juice. So we basically make it cordial. Think about Rose's lime juice as a style. Mm-hmm. We make this really nice really acidic style, sweet and sour cordial called grapefruit cordial. And then again, to accentuate it, we use taste buds and molecules to scientifically say, what are some of the complementing ingredients from a scientific perspective that will help to accentuate grapefruit? And we find that coriander and white peppercorn are those two ingredients that really lift in a way that no other ones do. And then we add a little star anise to it to give it some nuance. And that nuance just plays like a little dancing little thing in the background. We then use an ingredient as we're sorting through grapefruit and kind of where grapefruit's going to go and how to make grapefruit the star of the show, because this is a grapefruit drink. We find ourselves finding ingredients that are floral chemical makeup. And the floral chemical makeup that we chose to land on is rose and lavender. We use an ingredient called Cascadia. Cascadia is a really beautiful bittered style aperitif, if you will, out of Oregon. And it's fantastic. Comes out of Portland. To give you an idea on this, it's distilled and infused with rose petals, lavender, and gentian being sort of the backbone of it. And that gentian angelica root, angelica being a really common gin ingredient, help to kind of take these citrusy things and raise them up, right? A lot of the ingredients that we find in gin, in my opinion, in gin specifically, help to raise citrus notes high and make them very bright. And so we chose a few of those ingredients to help make our citrus note, grapefruit, even higher and brighter. With that being said, go ahead.
So it's called Cascadia, but it's not related to the Cascadia hops. It's
Cascadia. Let's see. I'm trying to think if there's hops in this. I don't recall there being hops in it.
Okay.
No, I don't see it on here.
Just named after the region.
Yep. 100%. So we then use a really beautiful cassis by one of the oldest families called Leger, and it's really lovely. I call it I even sometimes will refer to it as a little barnyardy. You get this kind of funk when you have really authentic cassis, and I love it. This particular berry in this drink really just brings some body and some fruitiness to it. It helps to elevate the flower, which then elevates the citrus, if that makes sense. So berries for flower, flower for citrus. And then we're using a lemongrass soda that we're making in-house. And the lemongrass soda is dry by nature. We make, I can ask really quick what's in it because I'm not thinking off the top of my head. Jax? Anyways, so the lemongrass soda we make in-house. It goes into a keg. We get forced carbonate, and then we use it to fill our own little soda bottles, and they get capped, and that's how they do it. So it gets about a 48-hour cold maceration and infusion of CO2, which, if you know anything about CO2, carbon dioxide, it leaves carbonic acid behind when it infuses into water, which means it brings acidity back to it. And so this soda is bone dry, and it really helps to elevate the drink. And the last thing that we do that I think makes a Paloma even better than a regular Paloma is a little salt. And so we take fennel flower and we take our fennel pollen, and we put fennel pollen in salt, and we salt the rim very particularly. And so that is the drink. And the drink is served in this beautiful Fresca glass that we recycle in our program. So
wow. And how much does a drink like that cost?
Our drinks are around $18.
Yeah, that's sort of, yeah. Why not?
Kind of the norm. I feel like it's the norm these days. I mean, we were in all the cities we're in recently, they were between about 17 and 20 bucks.
Yeah, for a fancy cocktail, absolutely. That's fascinating. So now I want to hear about these narratives, these stories that you have created within your three concepts. So why don't you pick one and tell it to me?
I'm going to talk mostly about Undertows, because Undertows is the most evolved storyline we have so far. Mm-hmm. But I can talk about all three. Undertow specifically, Undertow is really about a spice trading ship, 1800s. And the spice trading ship was moving goods. Think of a clipper ship, right? Those heavy wood boats that were fast as all get out. And those boats would move goods from one side to the other of the country and all over the world, frankly. And so the story picks up with the Undertow moving a shipment of goods. And during that journey of the movement of goods, a lot of things happen. The captain gets captured. Someone gets sick, they must find a recipe. The recipe will save the crew. The crew is damned. They have to go find the gray dodo bird. The dodo bird has the ingredient that they need in order to add it to this elixir. The elixir then goes and saves the crew, but they don't really get there in time. They lose most of the crew. The captain disappears. The first mate rises up in power. Eventually, the captain makes a comeback, and you see the captain kind of appear again. Talks loosely about his love. Her name is Emily. And the story goes on and on and on, and you see these little journeys that they have, these excerpts from their journal, if you will, that we call our fictional narrative, and it takes them all over the world. It takes them through, around the Cape, Brazil, and eventually something happens, and that is the transcontinental rail connects the East and the West. And so what was a very long and arduous journey becomes a little easier. And as you can imagine, our next protagonist arrives, and his name is Dr. Cotley Pennington. And Pennington has a train. And Dr. Cotley is moving goods. We fast forward about 40 years into the future, and we're in the middle of real prohibition, 1900s, and he's moving goods. We won't talk about the kind of goods he's moving, but he's a very wealthy man, and he knows what he's doing, and he's moving goods around the country. And he too has a really lovely lady by the name of Emily. Kind of interesting. Mm-hmm. Eventually, you walk in. Her name is Emily Gray, and eventually you find that storyline talking about his sort of, I would say, political migration through time as he's becoming a powerful and very wealthy individual who eventually, moves on and does some other things as prohibition comes and goes and things like that. And eventually you see the gray hen pop into the storyline, and the apothecary is overseen by a really lovely lady by the name of Emily. Mm. So Emily finds herself and her name in all the stories. I often reference the Eternals, if you've seen that movie, and you can recall Kingo, the Indian gentleman that's saying, "Oh, this was my great-great-grandfather. This was my great-grandfather. This was my grandfather. This was me." And it's like, 400 years of movies, and this guy is just being himself, playing his own part each of those centuries, right? The same kind of thing is happening here, and there's this really great fictional narrative that is beginning to kind of come to a head finally. And a lot of those questions that I get asked on a regular basis from our guests that come in the building are about to be answered, as all three of those storylines are going to be dropping over the next 8 weeks.
Oh, exciting.
So menus have launched, and we get menus done and off of our plate, and usually about 8 weeks later, the actual hard menu, the book that comes, the hardbound book shows up, and during that time, then the story kind of comes out, and folks can begin to ask a lot of questions, and we answer as many as we can, or we just say, keep watching.
So who creates these stories? Who writes these stories? Is it you?
No, so it is a gentleman by the name of Matt Snapp. 1 T, 2 P's, if you're writing that down, MATSNAPP. Matt joined us about a year ago, but he's been our ghostwriter since day one, so 6 years running. And he has a background in creative writing and journalism. He's an F&B guy through and through, but his early years coming out of college, he was pursuing creative writing and journalism and those kind of things. So once he found himself really immersed in the hospitality world, he never turned back. And then we provided an opportunity for him to get creative on the writing front. And so he took it, he bit hook, line, and sinker, and we caught him. And so now he's a member of our family as a partner in the company, and he oversees the operations for our entire business.
Wow. I feel like I've been talking to you for like 10 minutes, but we're almost out of time. But talk to me a little bit more about how long does it take to develop these cocktails? Sounds like a lot.
That's a great question. I would imagine that what I've asked for this year when we begin R&D again, because everything was really spurty because of the pandemic and what was happening, we would start writing the cocktail menu, and then 2 months later we would get back on it and things would change a little bit. So the idea here is that once we can identify where the boat is going, where the train is going, and where Emily Gray at the apothecary, because her menu is more of a journal with some sketches and some notes and sort of, kind of piecing together some parts that are missing from around the building. Once we determine where she's been for the last 10 years, because she disappears every 50 years or so because she must reset the timetable, then I will be making 3 trips. I will take a trip to each of those locations. Let's say that I'm going to give you an example. Let's say they say we're going to Mexico. Great. I'm going to go to Mexico. I'm going to spend 5 days in the city, and I'm going to get the research I need to write the menu. And then I'm going to give myself 30 days to write, ideate, R&D, and capture that entire menu. So my goal would be 90 days. In 3 months, we would write all 3 menus and be able to complete the educational and training documents. So our menus are 40 drinks, and 30, the apothecary being the smaller of the 3 menus. And so it will take us about a week to write the menu and 3 weeks to get it dialed in.
Wow, that is really fast, and you should be congratulated.
Thanks. Yeah, we'll do 110 drinks in 90 days is the goal.
That's amazing. Well, Jason Asher, it was a pleasure to meet you, and I hope this is the first of many conversations that we have, because this was really great.
Thanks. I enjoyed it as well. Anytime you want a little of my time, just reach out.
I will.
I love talking about all things. I'm a hospitalitarian through and through. And to be really frank, we do a lot of consulting. We work with a lot of chefs. We work with a lot of restaurants. We work with hotels. And the perspective, especially on trying to integrate interesting cocktails into these programs, is a conversation worth having. I love having it. So if you ever want to have something like that, please let me know.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I'll look you up when I'm in Phoenix.